our non-academic career. Before we get started, so this is going to be very informal. We're just going to sort of open it up for you guys to ask questions. But before we do that, I thought I would just really briefly introduce each of our panelists and thank them for coming. We really appreciate you all being here. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So our first panelist is Dr. Sheng, and she received her SD in pharmacoepidemiology from the Harvard School of Public Health in 1996. She's currently a partner and the chief epidemiologist at Analysis Group, which is a consulting company that provides drug safety, epidemiology research, health economics, and outcomes research, and litigation support for pharmaceutical manufacturers, government agencies, hospitals, and insurers. At Analysis Group, Dr. Du specializes in the safety, health economics, and outcomes of pharmaceutical or biological agents, and in mass tort drug safety litigations. She's also a visiting scholar here in the biostatistics department. So next we have Dr. Caroline Boeke, and she received her SD in epidemiology here in 2012. She also completed a postdoc fellowship at HSPH from 2012 to 2014. Dr. Boeke is currently a technical advisor for the Applied Analytics team of the Clinton Health Access Initiative, founded by President Clinton in 2002 to bring care and treatment to people living with HIV/AIDS and to strengthen health systems in resource-poor countries. Her research interests include maternal and child health, global health, and nutrition. Next, we have Dr. George Seage, who you all probably know. Dr. Seage received his SD in epidemiology from the Boston University School of Public Health in 1991. While a student at BU, he worked at the Boston Health Department for 12 years before joining the faculty of the BU School of Public Health as an associate professor of epidemiology. While at BUSPH, Dr. Seage was a senior scientist at Abt Associates in Cambridge, a contract research organization. He's currently at the Harvard School of Public Health, where he's professor of epidemiology and director of the HSPH program in the epidemiology of infectious disease. Dr. Seage researches adult and pediatric HIV transmission, natural history, and treatment. He led one of the first research teams to identify the biological and behavioral factors associated with the sexual transmission of HIV, the Boston Partners Study, the Boston Young Men Study, and the HIVNet Vaccine Preparedness Study, and directed the Massachusetts AIDS Surveillance Program for 7 years. Currently, he's a co-investigator of the cost-effectiveness of preventing AIDS complication study and principal investigator of the pediatric and HIV cohort study. And last, we have Dr. Nancy Maserejian. She received her SD in epidemiology from the Harvard School of Public Health in 2005. From 2005 to 2013, she worked as a senior research scientist and associate director of epidemiology at the New England Research Institute, which is a research organization and leader in public health research, clinical trials management, survey research, and epidemiology. She's currently the associate director of epidemiology at Biogen, a biotechnology company that focuses on developing therapies for patients with serious illnesses. And she's also a lecturer in oral and dental public health epidemiology at the Harvard School of Dental Medicine. So thank you all again for being here. We really appreciate it. And maybe before opening it up for questioning, I thought I would just ask the first question to start us off. And that is just, if you could each please describe why you chose a position outside of academia and at what point in your career you made this decision. You don't have to go in order.
Okay, well, it's so great to be back. That was almost 20 years ago when I still remember the G2 auditorium. This is where I took my cost-effectiveness course, and I remember at that time, I was the first year, the HPM program offered cost-effectiveness analysis. And the reason I mentioned that and how it's had to do with epidemiology is that nowadays it's really interdisciplinary in a lot of research that we do. And so to answer Alvin's question, just to stay focused, I actually have made up my mind I'm not going to do academic track since I was in the master's program. My background training was a pharmacy. I was a pharmacist from Taiwan at that time. And I just love real world situation. I love problem solving. But I know I'm not the most creative person. I probably won't be good at generating hypotheses like professors would do, but I know I'm pretty darn good at solving problems. So if you hand me a problem, I love the process of finding solutions. And also because when I was in pharmacy school, I did have a lot of exposure to the pharmaceutical industry. And I really love just be able to see how a drug is being developed and then solving the problems along the R&D process, the post-marketing situation. And I just feel I want to make a difference in the real world. So that's sort of where I started with. That's why I chose pharmacodynamiology for my for the PhD for the PsyD track. At that time, I really know I want to focus on pharmaceutical research.
So I went straight through from undergraduate to the doctoral program to my postdoc, and I'm still discerning what I would like to do in the long term and if I want to teach and be in academia in the long run, but I felt that it was important for me to get some on-the-ground experience outside of academia. I'm interested in global health, so I thought it would be important, even if I decide to teach in an academic setting in the long run, to get some experience with problem solving and being on the ground and helping to make policy decisions. And I think in the long run, whatever I decide to do, that will help make me a better teacher if I do come back to the academic track. So I'm glad I did my postdoc and I was able to really solidify my FB skills. But this has been a really good experience so far in terms of answering different types of questions and seeing the types of questions that happen in the nonprofit world.
Wow. So my experiences are so unusual that it's sort of hard to generalize. So I was actually a research assistant here at the Harvard School of Public Health, both in the epidemiology department working for Richard Munson, and also later on working for Arnie Epstein, who was chair of health policy and management. And along came this epidemic we now know as AIDS. And I had done my master's, and I thought, well, gee, this is a really interesting disease, and I was watching it develop while I was a student. And there was an ad that the health department was going to hire an AIDS surveillance epidemiologist. And I applied for the position, and I got it. And at that time, there were 30 cases of AIDS in Massachusetts and probably less than 1,000 for the whole country. And so CDC made a commitment to basically start AIDS surveillance to really get an idea of how big the epidemic was. So I sort of came in on the ground floor, and it happened to be in the health department. And I think what I realized while I was at the health department, that the job was way too interesting to give up. And so instead of applying here to be a full-time doctoral student, I applied to, there was a new program at BU that allowed one to go to this program mostly in the evening, but it allowed you to do your doctorate in epidemiology part-time. And so I had this amazing opportunity during the day of being in the front line and being dragged into sort of the crisis of the moment. And if you sort of see and watch what's been going on with Ebola, well, the first 2 or 3 years of AIDS, we didn't have the cause of AIDS. So everybody was worried about new and novel forms of transmission. So we would always be hearing rumors about some nurse getting AIDS or some child or whatever, and we'd always be chasing all these many different outbreaks to either confirm a case or not. So that is an unusual situation. It was sort of a very optimistic situation for me. And along the way, I decided to, go back, do my doctorate, really interested in doing academics and teaching, but at the same time felt that, the health department presented so many opportunities that, I couldn't leave. Later on, when I finally did leave, I realized that when I started putting together the HivNet, it was such a large project. I couldn't possibly, when I talked to Tony Fauci about doing HivNet at the health department, he sort of said, well, it was sort of like the Three Stooges building the atomic bomb. And he just couldn't imagine doing something like that, creating a vaccine and prevention trials network in a health department. So that's really how I ended up going, staying at BU and also doing PivNet and doing the vaccine trials network out of a company like App, which was 180-degree different experience. In a health department I was in, we didn't have, nobody had a typewriter. None of the typewriters actually worked. So I bought a typewriter, and it was the first self-correcting typewriter the health department had. We didn't even have computers, and that was a big deal. And I go to Apt, where basically any of the frustrations, anything that you needed, they provided in terms of support. So in terms of a support structure, and all the things that drive you crazy, and probably as students experience a lot of this as well, in terms of technology and so forth, you had people to help you with everything, budgets and finances and so forth, and allowed you to really dive much more into running the project and the science. But then there's different incentive structures set up in a private for-profit company versus academia. But I think those two experiences were so different, and it was such a different era. So nobody did a postdoc when I was, a student. It was like unheard of. Sorry. So, anyway, does that answer your question?
Okay, so I graduated in 2005. I got my degree here, and so people did do postdocs, and I was heavily considering one. But I think the one thing that made me not want to do the postdoc academic thing was I had a little bit of experience in the company I went to, so I knew what I was getting into because I had previously worked there before I came here to get my doctorate. I worked there as a research assistant and data manager. But also I did do, TAing and teaching assisting while I was here, and I didn't really feel a calling to be necessarily, a professor in the sense of teaching to students, although the whole other aspect of academia, which is the research and the grant writing and all that, I was interested in. And to me, those are, like real world problems that you're solving and that kind of thing. And so I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice to be able to do all the stuff involved in academia, but not have to teach? No offense to the students, and now I participate in, as she mentioned, I have an appointment at the dental school where I do once in a while lecture and all that sort of thing. But I think the main, at this point, so I also consider the job that I had for the first 8 years at the company I worked with, I consider it kind of a lot of academia. Basically, I was writing grants, getting most of my work was NIH funded, or DoD, Department of Defense, and that sort of, and a little bit of it, as time go on, more of it was industry sponsored or private sponsored. And I felt a need for a bigger change. So now I'm currently at Biogen, which is a biotech company, and I don't do any grant writing. Was basically, I felt like I know a lot about epidemiology in a lot of different circumstances. I didn't know what it was like to be on the inside. And I talked to a lot of people before making the change because I was hesitant. And, the advice was I got, this is just going to make you more complete as an epidemiologist. You're going to get to see another aspect. If you don't like it, nowadays it's actually, it's a good thing to have that experience inside of an industry. So you're not really going to cause much damage if you're taking this as a risk, because you will get something out of it. And so I've been there almost a year now, start, as of next week. So as of now, all's good.
Not an academic position, but a position at area where you were really performing a lot of traditionally academic duties like grant writing. How was that perceived in your application to the pharmaceutical industry? If you could just talk about that transition.
Sure. I think, the grant writing, it's not something that was talked about as much as the fact that I actually got grants funded, and that I was a PI, and that I led studies and observational research, and and some of it was involved in specific disease. That's the type of thing that they do in phase 4 studies. I think the thing that kind of made me stand out, because I didn't really have any personal connections to the recruiters or, that sort of thing, I think I had a lot of publications, and I was surprised at how much they valued that, because once you're in industry, publishing isn't their priority, usually, typically. So, but they did like the fact that for my tenure at NERI, I had, a lot of first author publications, and that showed to them that I had a lot of capability. So, and the transition for me was quite smooth. Again, I think I had a very unique experience at NERI. I'm not unique for NERI, but NERI is a unique place where you do have an academic, plus you get to be on the other side of industry where you're supporting their requests. So I had a little bit of a sense of what I was getting into. Sure. So in Biogen, the way Epi is set up is we're housed within their safety group. So we kind of sit in their safety group. So I think the original intention was really that for drugs that are on the market, you typically, let's get some epidemiologists to give us some background, what do we expect versus what we observe. So the basic, if we see 5 events, is this more than we should expect in this patient population or in this, that sort of thing. So, and over time now, the value of Epi is clearly, in all industry, in all different companies, the value of Epi is, being more appreciated now. And so I do interact more with some of the health economics folks, also some of the medical teams who are designing phase 4 observational studies, and they don't really understand some of the nuances of observational research. So I've been involved. So my day-to-day tasks, sometimes I'm helping on a group that designs a phase 4 study. Other days I'm doing literature review for a safety question that came up to see is there anything in the literature on this event in this population. And then, I think then we also have access to administrative claims databases, so I sometimes design protocols to look at those claims databases to answer questions that aren't in the literature.
I want to say, I think in the consulting world, you have to be at the head of the curve, just replicate as an expert. And so that's where I want to say in consulting where I feel very gratifying. And then my job is I still touch bases back to epidemiology all the time. And every project is like a couple of weeks. So if you really love research,
Wrong thing to say.
Right. And our clients are looking for solutions. The difference, I think, compared to consulting or industry versus academia is our problems are real world business issues that need to be addressed. Either drug safety issues to answer to the FDA or the European Medicine Agency, or in my situation, my goal actually has been I want to broaden epidemiology applications to different industry. That has been sort of what I wanted to do. Not just drug industry, I actually, in my consulting capacity, you'll be surprised, I also provide consultation to automobile industry and to financial industry as well. And you will say, what's epidemiology to do with stock market? It is very related. I can apply epi method to even study Toyota's car. Why they're, you guys must remember 2-3 years ago, Toyota had a brake issue, right? The unexpected acceleration issue. So what is that to do with drug safety and epidemiology? And I remember when I walked into the room, they are all engineers in the auto industry, right? Nobody heard of Poisson regression. And they show me the data from highway safety, which is very similar to the data in in the drug safety world, but in the automobile world, they have their own FDA. And so they have their own spontaneous reports data, and only look at counts. So you'll be like, wait a minute, of course Toyota's going to have more events just because you had the best-selling cars, right? So you have more cars there, of course you have more events, all else equal. So I'm just supposed to look at rate? and I thought that's so like no-brainer. And they were like, oh. and then you look at newspaper, everybody talk about how many deaths occurred right in Toyota drivers. You remember those days? And then we're like, wow, there are 300 Americans got killed. But people don't think about denominator. And so how do you help them analyze auto safety data? And so it's all epidemiological approach. You think about the car, it's like a patient. The age of the car is like the age of the patient, right? And the model of the car is like, what are the brands of the medicine you are taking? You have different brands. Toyota has different brands. And they have a common structure for the car model that, different, Camry or whatever, they have different modifications. And for cars, I think the key safety confounder is how high the base is to the ground. That relates to the stability of the car. Although we're talking about brake acceleration, that you can think about confounding factors, what causes a car accident. It's so similar. So I think that's where I found it very interesting. I've been advocating epidemiology to different industries. Like you have to hire epidemiologists because observational data, that's how you should correctly how you should get information. So I guess what I'm saying is in consulting, because people come to us from all sorts of different industries for their problems. And that's where I just found it so exciting. And so to your question, you have to learn every day. You have to. It's your job. So in a way, I just love to be paid to learn.
I would agree that I've learned so far, even though I've only been at my job for a few months, that epi skills can really be applied in many different areas. So I work a fair amount with economists and people trained in the business world, and part of the trick is realizing that there are differences in lingo and terminology, but really often we're talking about the same thing. So I think a big important skill is sort of reading up on the terminology used in other fields so that you're able to speak the same language. But at the end of the day, a lot of the epi techniques that I've learned can be applied in some more diverse ways and fields. But back to the original question about how do I stay current, I would say that my job actually also is similar to academia in a lot more ways maybe than I expected. I still read journals, I still use PubMed, I still come to HSPH for lectures sometimes. I am able to consult with experts, so a lot of the same ways that you would stay current with the literature in academia. We also go to conferences and present at conferences as well.
Yeah, so I really never left academia. Even when I was in the health department and not going to school, we had relationships with both schools of public health. We were living in an outbreak. And so, I would be coming here to hear lectures and also to learn more epi methods. I would be going to BU because BU was right next door to the health department. So I found it was really a great break from sort of what I was dealing with to be able to come and hear Ken Rock and give a talk. And that was a lot of fun. It was a real treat. Now that I'm here, I find that I don't take advantage of all the opportunities because there's so many opportunities here. I can't get any work done. But I went to every day there's some great talks and great things going on, and I really have to sort of walk fast past the easels and the elevator because I will get sucked into something really cool. And that's the wonderful thing about being here. I think it's probably really wonderful for students. But you have to figure out your work-life balance, not just personally, but also professionally, and how much dessert you can have versus the main course. And I think that's a big issue here But obviously when you're not here, and when I was at APT, I would always be like, I would feel much more isolated when I was at APT than when I was in the health department. I mean, the health department, it was almost essential. If Max was giving a talk, we all went over to see the talk. We had these AIDS task forces, both the governor's and the mayor's task force, and half the people and faculty here were on those task forces. So we had lots of interactions with faculty of both schools of public health. Harvey Feinberg, who was the dean, was always engaged. I'd always be calling him up, asking him for advice about, Ray Flynn thinks that we should be doing this. What do you think about that idea? And he was always tremendously giving and helping to us on the front line. Having those relationships actually really helped us a lot in the early days of the epidemic, that we didn't have just everybody running around with their hair on fire, which can happen in an outbreak.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I feel that I have to take it upon myself now when, because you can get focused in on the immediate needs, right? And so I look at AJE, I get, the American Journal of Epidemiology, the emails that come into me and the International Journal of Epidemiology, so I actually look at those, and now before, more than ever, like I never used to, but now I definitely look at the methods part, right? So I used to kind of ignore the methods when I was in school, I used to ignore the methods papers, but now that's what I focus on because I want to know what new methods are coming up, how can I keep current. It's nice to go to a place that has like you mentioned before, like the ability to support, and to invest in their employees. So where I currently am, they have tons of seminars too, but they're generally more scientific. And so in our FD group, we have the support to go to at least, one major conference or, maybe more than that, and to do that sort of meeting, any sorts of trainings that go on to attend those. So at least there's that financial support that if you see an opportunity for continuing education, you can go and do it.
Can I just add one more point? So at both the health department and at APT, I found myself like being the only epidemiologist who was formally trained. There's a lot of clinicians at the health department, but none of them knew any epidemiology. And the same thing at APT. I was the only PhD epidemiologist. And you tend to get sucked into very various things being the only epidemiologist in an organization. So, you'd be sitting there and a clinician would run in and say, give you a 2x2 table, 4 numbers, and say, can you give me a p-value for that? And you have no idea what the design of the study was or what even the subject matter was. So one word of warning is that you really don't want to be the only person, although, obviously it makes you very valuable, but it really can be pretty isolating if you're the only one with those skills, those technical skills sitting there. Everybody will sort of come to you and ask for p-values.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was considering another job where I would be the only epidemiologist there, and I talked to a former, mentor type of person, and that was one of her very good warnings to me that I hadn't really thought of before, that, if you're the only one there, who are you going to bounce your ideas off of, and who are you going to learn from, because you want to always be able to do that as well.
On the flip side, though, so I am one of 3 PhDs in epidemiology at my organization, and there are a fair number who are also have like a master's degree in epi or biostats. But it is kind of nice after coming from a place like here where we all are trained in pretty similar methods to feel like I'm really adding something new and different, and my experience and expertise is different from that of those around me. That has been a refreshing and a nice feeling to have, like I'm really contributing in a different way, and at the same time I'm really able to learn from people with very different backgrounds.
We tend to work in a team environment. We usually work with people with different skill sets. As I was saying about the cost effectiveness analysis courses I took, actually turns out to be very helpful for me because I do have to work with economists. Sometimes you complete a project with different components. So actually, if I'm advertised for a second, I have 2 job openings. And we are just right down the street located in Prudential Center, so you don't even need to relocate. Take Prudential staff. So so in consulting industry, again, we sell our expertise. So I think in different industry, there are different applications. So I can give you an example. 5 years ago, I got a project from a drug company that asked me to do marginal structural model. Okay, 5 years ago. Nowadays, you all probably know about marginal structural model. You can take causal inference courses. In my days, Jenny Robbins was a first year over G estimation. I don't know whether you took that course. So I was the guinea pig class, okay? The first year he offered G estimation, we had no idea what he was talking about. And I can tell you even more horrifying. So that year I took my qualifying exam. Half of the questions are from Jenny. We totally caught all of us off guard because none of us thought you would be on the qualifying exam. So it was the first year he offered G estimation course. And luckily I studied before my qualifying exam the night before because I figured why not, I have extra time. And half of us did not pass that year because of that. Okay. So, but the long story short is I still remember that G estimation because half of my friends had to redo it, and then, so it was very traumatizing to our cohort. And then about 5 years ago, a company called me. They wanted to do marginal structural model. I was like, my God, this is Jimmy Robbins' class. And so there were no soft codes for it. Okay, and I remember when I took the course, there was no soft codes for it. But we have to do it I wanted to do it because it's challenging, A, and B is, I never figured out what G estimation was, but now I finally got paid to figure it out. So, actually, the first thing I did, I called Jenny. I said, Jenny, do you remember me? He said, yes, I do. Oh my God, you remember me? And he was like, because you were one of the few who passed my course. Oh my gosh, so okay. So I said, can you be a consultant for this project? Because we really need to do this causal inference model for clients. And so he was on board. And so in terms of PhDs, to your question, I really think you need just to study well at school, learn your methodology. There are a lot of high-tech jobs, pay very well, really need PhD level expertise. I think the U.S. economy, as you know, is become a bit bipolar. When you don't have expertise, actually, that's where it's a little bit hard to find a job. So nowadays, when I interview candidates, if they tell me they do causal inference, I was like, you are hired. Where else people want to look at causal inference, right? But it's such in demand. And I actually came talk to Dr. Walker the other day, asking how the curriculum, the AP department focusing on these more quantitative methodology. And he was saying that, I'm not sure whether people believe in causal inference modeling. I was like, my gosh, this is what industry are doing. There's a great job demand on these kind of very quantitative skill sets. And the reason I really want to encourage you guys to do well at school and learn as much as you can and be as good as you can, especially in quantitative sciences, is not only in consulting, the startup high-tech company. You go to Google, you go to Twitter, you go to Amazon.com, they all need this type of skill set. Although you would think they are not healthcare, but they do. They will hire you right off the bat.
I would say for me, the advice I was given was that with a PhD, you're going to get a second look, you're going to get interest in your application if you apply for a job outside of academia. But it is important to show that you are not just a bookworm and that you, one, can communicate effectively. So communicating complex methodology to a lay audience, for example. Two, that you have other skills besides publishing papers. So that you've demonstrated leadership, if possible, that you've managed others or worked in a more independent leadership type role. So I think it's really important to highlight those other types of qualities and skills outside of just publishing papers, and find instances from your doctoral training that can highlight those qualities.
So, it's great that you're hiring people that use those methods, because, sometimes you sort of wonder if, we're in such a silo here, that we sort of really wonder how useful they are. So it's good that people are using them. Besides, just for your dissertation, the thing that, as if you go back and forth between academia and industry, which is what I did in the health department in the public sector, I always wanted to have the sort of the cash to be able to buy myself back into academia. And there were two things I always tried to do and make sure that I did well, and make sure that I could cash in if I needed to come back. One was, there's nothing like generating your own money. So, whatever you end up doing, whether you're working in industry or whether you're working in a consulting capacity or working even in the health department, bringing in grants and bringing in cash is really highly valued. So no matter where you work, that's an important skill set to have. In addition, if you really think you may want to come back to academia, making sure you continue to publish and don't have big gaps if you want to come back. So I think, if you look at my CV, my most productive time, maybe it was because I was young and I had, most of my brain cells, my neurons were still functioning, but I was incredibly productive when I was in the health department, of all places, right? You'd think, here, we didn't even have typewriters that worked. But we really cranked out lots and lots and lots of papers. And they were valued not so much by, like, Ray Flynn and, the Commissioner of Health, but they were valued by my peers in the health department, my peers at CDC and NIH. But they were very valuable when I decided to go back in academia, because they would look and say, oh, so you didn't disappear for 5 years. You published and you brought in your own money. And those are the two, sort of like cash is king. And those are the two things that if you're going to, and again, a different era, maybe it's not applicable now, but I think it may be more applicable now, is to be able to publish but generate whatever the revenue is, wherever you are, so you have, value added to the organization. Because every organization is looking, whether it's a for-profit company or whether it's a government agency, is always looking for more revenue. That's really how the world works.
Yeah, I think one thing that can maybe make you stand out from a bunch of other PhDs applying is to show that you know how to deliver when there's a need. So in industry, you're not out to solve all the world's problems or the problems that you necessarily do, think. You basically have to provide the answer that they, an answer to their question. And that might be tomorrow. And that the question was asked today. And so I think you have to kind of prove that you can work under pressure. You can say that by using your experiences or coming up with some scenarios where you provided something, whatever challenges you overcame to deliver what report or whatever it was that was needed. So I think the worry is that, in hiring somebody who's been in academia for 3 years, you might say, well, can they first of all write, clearly, communicate clearly in a way that people who aren't epidemiologists can understand? Or can they think, maybe if it's somebody from, either if it's FDA, something going to an FDA type of thing, or something going to medical and whatever it is, just to think outside of the epi box and to show that you can provide the reports and the results that they need at their time.
Just one more addition. Going back to learning the lingo, I think that's a really important thing if you are applying outside of academia, that you learn the lingo before your interview, and you're using those buzzwords, and again, this has to do with communication, but talk the same language as the industry that you're interested in. I think that's very important because you might be talking about the same thing, but if you use the epi terminology, they might not know that you're talking about the same thing.
That's a very great advice. Yeah, actually, people can talk about work at AstraZeneca, so I kind of went through that process, and I was found just throw out buzzwords. It really impressed people, and that's my trick.
Can you give some examples of these buzzwords? I think I need to learn some of them too.
Yeah, and to George's point about being able to sell and bring in grants, I think that's just universal. Maybe I don't think in pharmaceutical industry, maybe the money is already there, but in my organization, we also need to find funding too. And so, be able to find grants in the academic setting, you apply to an NIH grant or whatever, you write grants. And it seems to be not as interpersonal. That in my industry, you really need to have the interpersonal skills to get projects, to get grants, to get funding. Because you have private clients, and they usually are not very sophisticated. So to take that example, modular structural model, in a way, I sold that project because they did not know what analytical method they should use, and they were stuck with a request from a UK government organization called NICE. And so once they present the issues to me, I thought about Jenny Robbins, and then I thought about modular structural model. You know what? This is the parallel world analysis, the counterfactual modeling we need to do. And then they were like, counterfactual modeling? That sounds so sexy and fancy. Yeah. And then but you need to just be able to explain it in a layman way that they understand what you are trying to do. So this is the not Jenny Robbins mode, because so I remember I mentioned to you that I hired him as a consultant and I brought him to one of the client calls. So he talked for 30 minutes. Nobody said anything. There were 30 people from the drug company on the line. So what is Harvard professor going to tell us about marginal counterfactual modeling? 30 people on the phone call across the globe from the drug company. Total silence. And so I was at Jenny's office. So I said, well, if I may summarize, here are the 4 points Dr. Robbins was trying to say. So I said, 1, 2, 3, 4. I said, oh, okay, everybody got it. Like, okay, so Dr. Du will give you whatever the grant you want. And then Jimmy put the phone on the mute, said, man, that's not exactly what I said. and I said, Jimmy, exactly what you said, nobody understood it. So there is this skill set as well. We have to communicate our findings. The audience is not always people like us. The audience, they are lay people, they are clinicians, and you have people who are semi-sophisticated. And also, for public health perspective, when I do the drug safety litigation work, I have to talk to jurors. I have to talk to jurors on average have a 8th grade education level. So how do I explain hazard ratio to them? How do I explain what the incident rate ratio means to an 8th grade average jurors, so they can understand my argument and buy into my argument. So that's also a very important skill set, I think, as an epidemiologist, the ability to communicate in a way depends on your audience that they can understand you. So when you interview, they are going to have different people interview you usually, not just epidemiologists. You probably have medical directors interview you. They will have maybe the vice president of medical communication will be interviewing you. So cater to different audiences in terms of what kind of depth you want to drill down into, what you know. But usually when I interview with fellow epidemiologists, I really want to showcase my methodology ability. But then when you talk to the medical people, make sure talk about things in the context of clinical trials, things like that, they can relate to. So that's an ability, sort of, not only learn what you do, but also be able to think about your audience.
And along those lines, not just explaining what the method is, but why you need to use a certain method. So that's something I took for granted while I was here, that a lot of the time we are speaking the same language and we're trained in the same way. So, some things are kind of taken for granted, some of the basic assumptions we make or the choices we make with the model we choose. And, when you're working with non-epidemiologists, it's really important to be able to justify in a very clear way, why you chose those types of analyses.
I'd like to, definitely, I agree 100% with that. Where I am right now, I was very impressed by just how smart everybody is. Like, they hire really top-notch people, and you're sitting around a table with a lot of people who are assertive and are very capable and will question you on every single thing you say. And it actually, sometimes I stop, I'm like, wait, am I right? Yes, I'm right. So you have to you have to be confident, you have to make sure you can explain and justify and kind of just defend back up. So it's kind of like, although getting grants isn't necessary to my job right now, the act of, saying this is the need, this is how you solve, the whole process of it is still every day something I use. Something else I would say also is that oftentimes in your program, you were thinking about what concentration you want to have, and postdocs are usually focused on maybe a specific area, if it's nutrition or cancer, whatever. And in industry, depending on the size of the company or you're interviewing with, they may have 1 or 2 disease areas, they may have 10, and they don't know what they're going to have in 2 years maybe. So they want to know that you're not married to cancer epi, that if they need somebody who's something totally different, you may be willing to do that. So I think, if you're not, that's something you have to think about for yourself. But if you are, that's something you should express to say, the methods are really what I'm at, and I can apply those methods to anything. But that's something you have to think about for yourself.
So this is a question that kind of relates to what you all touched on, which is what role do you think a postdoc plays, assuming it's high quality and good training experience, for moving in and out of academia at different points in your career? Would you advocate a postdoc? Would you see it as time outside the workforce if your ultimate goal is to be in a non-academic setting? And I can see a lot of pros and cons, and so I was looking for your reflections on that.
I think it might depend on what your experience was before. So if you did have some experience beforehand in industry or in private organizations or in other non-academic types of settings, then you may not need to go into it. But it kind of buys you time is one other way to look at it. Like if you didn't get a chance to publish much, if you didn't get involved in a lot of things while you're here, and the postdoc gives you that time to show that you can get grants and show that you can do those sorts of things, then it might be a good idea.
I would agree, but if you're sure that you don't want to do academia, I don't think you need to do postdoc. I was glad that I did one because, as I said, it provided just some extra protected time to really implement the skills that I had learned in my coursework and my dissertation and apply them in new settings, learn to use some different data sets. So for me, I was really glad that I did it, but I think if you're pretty sure you don't want to do academia, there's no reason that you should feel like you have to do this.
I totally concur with Caroline. I actually think it's a waste of time. If you know you don't want to go to academia, why? I mean, because I think, at least in my industry, I think in the drug industry as well, the tenure in the industry actually matters a lot in your earning power. How much they pay you, actually a lot depends on your years of experience in that industry. So why? I mean, so right now I have about 60 people working for me. And I have to say, when they come to the door, they have 2 years postdoc at Harvard versus a fresh new graduate to me. You start with the same salary.
And you see no difference in skill sets?
Not much. Yeah. Well, here the thing is, it's more important for me to bring up the person internally, right?
Right. Your own methods.
Trade.
Yes,
exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
So if they start younger, actually, it's easier for me.
Those things to fix.
Exactly. You can mold them the way your organization is.
Yes.
Yeah. And actually,
That's a good point.
Yeah, we actually don't like people who already say, no offense, George, but we don't like to hire professors because they're staying in their mode, and it's really hard to mold them the way you want them. So,
One other thing I would add is, for me, I went straight through from to the doctorate, so I didn't have any work experience. So for me, I was able to say I had 2 years of work experience, so it was good to have in the job.
Can you talk about potential for growth in the industry? What do you see as a technologist out there? I assume consulting, maybe there's more kind of growth trajectory, or maybe other areas kind of higher position you might be able to.
So, I mean, so there's a trajectory within EPI. So, you know, we do hire master's level, we also hire PhD level, and depending on how much experience you have in industry is where kind of what places you, or in industry similar experiences is what places you here. And then I've seen, you know, it hasn't been that long that Biogen has had this EPI group. It's just been like 4 years now. But already there's been some, you know, really outstanding epidemiologists who have added value outside of the EPI group enough so that they've actually moved, you know, to the higher level in the EPI, but also even part of a new initiative within the organization that looks at, you know, uses EPI methods in other ways other than just in the safety group, for example, where we are. So, you know, if you're a bright star, there, you know, you'll get noticed, and that can always create your own trajectory. But there's room for growth.
So I'm at the Clinton Health Access Initiative, or CHI, and we're a very young, new organization, founded just over 10 years ago, and growing very rapidly. So I think we have doubled in size in the last few years, from like 600 to 12 to 1,300. And I'm on the applied analytics team within the organization, which is basically a team of people with some sort of training in biostatistics, epi, or economics. And we essentially serve as statistical consultants for the different global health projects within the organization. So some people's time is, like, I'm 100% on one project right now, but other people are split across 5 very different projects, from like vaccine coverage to HIV to malaria to maternal and child health. And so the team itself is relatively new. I guess it's definitely new in HSPH terms. It's less than 10 years old. And so because of that, there's a lot of constant change and certainly the potential for growth. So I know some people who started off in my position have fallen in love with one project area and have now progressed to be directors of teams, so running project, essentially PIs of projects. So that's a possibility. My team hires master's level folks as well as doctoral level, and so we're at different levels. And then there's a level above us